Okay, we'll call the meeting to order.
It's a good gavel.
Yeah, it's my coffee cup. So we have a number of items on the agenda tonight, one of which is several minutes.
So we'll have to vote on each of them separately.
We do?
Okay.
Well, there was one I found somebody's name was missing, and so I looked up in my handy dandy notes, and I think I got the guy's name.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe he'd had a sign-in sheet, so I thought, oh, well, they probably know who it
And I
is.
think in one set, you guys said I was absent, but then I came in late.
Yeah, I saw it. I had that note too.
No big.
Okay. Make a note of those.
Which date?
Oh, yeah, that would help, huh?
Yeah, well, let's start with the first one.
Start from the
First
beginning.
one is August 11, 2014.
Move to approve?
Second?
All right. Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
I'm going to sneak a look at yours because mine
Oh,
is
yeah.
taking forever
Commissioner
to come
Henkin?
up here.
I can't
Yeah,
mind.
they're
Commissioner
taking a long
Espy?
time to come up to me.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
voted
Vice
for it and I wasn't
Commissioner McGriff?
Aye.
All right. Motion
Wasn't
passes.
that one? I think it was the next one. So how about the minutes of
25th?
the 20, no, do you have yours in order?
I think I did.
That's September the 8th. September 15th. I think you're missing one.
Might be.
Which is the next one?
August 25th should be
Okay.
2014.
Let's see. Yeah, here's this. Here's the
Oh.
August 25th
Oh,
one.
okay. Is that the one where the guy's
I'll move
name
to
is missing?
approve the minutes from the August 25th meeting.
I didn't catch it.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, I thought I did. Okay, never mind.
All right.
That was the last one.
This one.
Commissioner Guile?
There it is.
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
It's,
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Vice Chair McGriff?
Aye.
All right. Motion passes.
So we have the minutes of September the 8th. And I think that's the one where we want to note that Paul Espy was in attendance
I was late.
due to other, and then on, again, I apologize, I just left all my stuff on the counter. There's a note here that there's a missing name here, so you have Don Julio. I don't think it was Don Julio.
I think it should have been.
I have Don Dulio.
Don Dulio.
I had Don DiMilo. I had DIELO in my notes.
Is this a public commenter?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm assuming
DIELO?
you have the sign-in sheets because he
Okay.
testified just before Brian Shaw.
Correct.
Okay. We'll look for that and make the correction.
All right. Do we have a motion? Do
I moved that we accept those minutes.
we have a second?
Second.
All right. Let's start the other way this time. Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Vice Chair McGriff?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. And the last
So
one is
that was
September
moved as
15th.
corrected, right?
Yes.
So then the last and least is the
September
September 15th.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments on that one?
I move we accept them.
Second.
All right. Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Vice Chair McGriff?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, so tonight on our agenda, we have a legislative item, and it is get into the agenda here, cancel that out, close that.
We've not received any public comments for non-agenda items.
Oh, yes, is there anybody here who would like to speak to the commission on items that are not otherwise on the agenda? Seeing none, let us move on to the next item, which is the public hearing on PC 15-165. We're at 165 already?
Already.
Or legislative file L-1501, adoption of stormwater and grading design standards.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. And I'm Pete Walter, planner with Planning Division. The Legislative file LE 1501 is the update to the Oregon City Stormwater and Grading Design Standards. These standards implement the city's Drainage Master Plan, which is an adopted ancillary document to the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. And the city last updated its design standards for stormwater and grading and erosion control as well in 1999, and there have been some code amendments as well to implement those. The reason for the update is that the city stormwater management program is subject to a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, Municipal Separate Storm and Sewer System, or MS4 permit, which is quite a mouthful, which is administered by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality through the Environmental Protection Agency, for the Environmental Protection Agency. The city was reissued its current NPDES MS4 permit in 2012, and this requires that the city implement a comprehensive stormwater management program, including establishing controls for stormwater runoff from developing areas. And tonight, the engineering staff and consultant from Brown and Caldwell will be here to present these standards to you. With respect to the legislative process, as an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan and implementing documents, there is a requirement for a public hearing process, and this slide explains some of the public meetings and notices. We did provide notice of the updates in the Oregon City News and Clackamas Review. There is a project website with the draft standards and appendices on it. The proposal was presented to the Natural Resources Committee on April the 8th, who unanimously recommended approval. There was a work session with the City Commission on April the 7th, a presentation to the Citizen Involvement Council on April the 6th by John Lewis, I believe, our Public Works Director, and an engineer developer workshop February 19th, 2015. Once these standards are adopted by the City Commission, the city will file a post-acknowledgement plan amendment to the Department of Land Conservation and Development through that process. With respect to the updates, the comprehensive plan process requires that the updates consider how the updates are implemented. They require looking at the adequacy of the planning to guide land use actions, including an examination of trends, whether the plan still reflects community needs, desires, attitudes, and conditions, and that includes changing demographic patterns and economics, and the addition of updated factual information, including that made available to the city of regional, state, and federal government agencies. And I think with respect to these standards as an engineering document, we're primarily looking at implementation of a drainage master plan. It is a very technical document. It's required to be implemented through a permit that the city holds for stormwater discharge jointly with other agencies, and is required to be up to date with the DEQ and EPA standards. We have prepared a staff report indicating how this proposal complies with these goals in the city's comprehensive plan and with statewide planning goals to the extent that they are applicable. Goal 1, public involvement. Goal 2, land use. Goal 5, open spaces, scenic and historic areas, and natural resources. Goal 6, quality of air, water, and land resources. Goal 7, natural hazards. Goal 9, economic development. Goal 10, housing. Goal 11, public facilities. And Goal 13, energy conservation. And the staff report has detailed findings with respect to those. So staff does recommend approval of the proposed amendments and their implementing ordinance, which is Oregon City Municipal Code 3.12, to the Planning Commission and City Commission. And without further ado, I would invite the engineering staff to explain to you in more detail the process and the updates. And I'd like to introduce Brown and Caldwell. It's Alyssa, right? Sorry.
Good evening, Commissioners. Do you have the other PowerPoint?
Oh, sorry, let me
Is
get
the
that up.
microphone on?
Yep. Here.
So Brown and Caldwell, it has been our stormwater consultant for this project for over a year now, and has been working with city staff, public works and planning staff, a nice team that we put together to work through the update of this manual. And it's providing design details for both our grading design as well as our stormwater design. And the update was primarily focused on the regulation that we're tasked with meeting. And Alyssa is going to provide you with some details on that process, as well as the updated standards that have changed from our existing standards, and a bit of background about Oregon City stormwater management, where we have been and where we're going with our new standards. So I'll turn it
So I'll
over
need
to
to cue the slides for you. Yeah,
Alyssa.
We're good to go.
you're good.
So again, my name is Alyssa Maxwell, and I'm a civil engineer with Brown and Caldwell. And as Alita said, we've been working on this project for over a year, and working with Oregon City staff on stormwater issues for longer than I've been with Brown and Caldwell. So let's just roam through it. Here we go. So just to give you the quick background and overview, I'm sure none of this is news to you, but Oregon City has a number of natural systems, and the goal of these standards from an environmental standpoint is to protect the natural systems that run through the city. Of course, the Willamette and Clackamas Rivers, Abernethy Creek, Newell Creek, Coffee Creek, a number of small drainage channels. All of those things I think residents would consider to be assets to the community, and so in general the stormwater standards are looking to protect those systems. Currently the city's stormwater infrastructure has both private and public infrastructure. Those would be pipes and facilities. As Pete mentioned, the current water quality and flow control standards have been in place since 1999, and there's a number of drainage master plans that city staff use to implement new projects. We expect continued development in Oregon City, and so these stormwater standards guide both development projects as well as the city's own public projects. So the same standards apply in either case. Next one. So where is stormwater regulated in current standards? Again, the current manual's from '99. There's a affiliated erosion and sediment control manual that talks about what to do during construction. Stormwater management in general is in Municipal Code 1312. I think the slide Pete had said 312. We're editing 1312. As well as 1747 has the erosion and sediment control standards. There's a number of other places that stormwater is brought up, but for the most part, in current standards, everything points to 1312, and 1312 references a stormwater and grading design standards manual. So that's what we're updating today. I do want to point out that the existing manual that the city adopted in 1999, if we look at who was doing what for stormwater in 1999, Oregon City was definitely fairly progressive in adopting a comprehensive manual at that time. Larger communities like Portland, Seattle, King County were the ones that were implementing sort of citywide stormwater management at that time, and then very few sort of middle and smaller sized communities had a comprehensive manual. So Oregon City was really paying attention to things and thinking about stormwater in '99, adopting those standards. And I think the impact that we've seen is that as development has progressed, you guys don't have the significant flooding problems that we see in other communities that haven't been managing stormwater well. So that brings up the question, if things have been going well, why should we make a change? We've kind of talked through some of that. So let's look at the regulations. So from a flooding standpoint, as much as managing how much water is out there, the city's current standards would do fine. Where we run into some challenges is in the water quality aspect. And water quality is one of the great assets we have in Oregon. It's one of the things that when you take public surveys, people point to clean water as being one of the reasons that they love living here. And we are still having problems with some of our water quality standards. So locally, water quality standards have been exceeded in the Willamette River, and the city is subject to the TMDL, total maximum daily load, which allocates how much pollutant of various types the city is allowed to discharge into various water bodies. In addition, the city has what's called a Phase 1 NPDES permit. That's a permit from DEQ, and that permit guides how the city implements the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act says you can't discharge pollutants into natural systems. The city's NPDES permit gives permission for the city to have a stormwater system, a series of pipes that discharge water into the river, provided that the city meets certain standards for that water, and that's where these standards come in place. So the new permit, which was issued in 2012, and these permits run for 5 years, give or take. Usually they get extended. So the current permit that was issued by the state in 2012 says that the city must establish stormwater standards, and these have to manage new development and redevelopment projects. The difference here is that they've got specific standards for reducing not just how much water is flowing, not just the volume of water, but the duration and how often that water flows at those rates. So we're really trying to target natural runoff conditions. So when you develop a piece of land and you add impervious surface, that sends water off of the site much faster than it would if that was bare earth or forest. And so we need to have some sort of controls in place to basically mimic natural conditions. The other thing that's in the permit is the requirement to use low impact development standards. And you guys, I'm sure, have heard that term. And that's looking at things like we call green infrastructure, stormwater facilities that are landscaped stormwater facilities, less underground pipes, more above ground landscaped features. The next one. This highlights the pieces that we're really looking at in these new standards. And of note is at the bottom of the slide, we point out the permit requirement was for these new standards to be adopted by November 1st, 2014. So obviously we're a little bit behind in that. The city staff have been talking with DEQ to make sure that the regulators understand the process and understand that the city has been diligently working long since before the deadline to get new standards in place. So while we haven't officially adopted in time for the deadline, the state seems to be okay with the city showing due diligence and working forward on these new standards. So what's the process that we went through? So Lita mentioned we had a team of city staff and consultants, and staff were from various city departments, and we performed an evaluation of the current standards, comparing them to the regulations. And then we looked, once we identified that there were some areas where the current standards would not meet the new regulations, we had to come up with a strategy. And that strategy was to identify existing manuals, existing documents. In this case, Clackamas County had done some previous work on developing a new stormwater manual, and that became the primary source document for this work. We're looking for regional consistency. We want the same requirements for a developer, whether they're working in Clackamas County or Oregon City or Wilsonville or anywhere. We want the same thing. We've had a series of policy workshops with city staff to talk about these standards and figure out how the different policies would mesh together. We developed a full manual, and then Pete talked about kind of the outreach and education piece that's been going on, as well as our adoption process. So, I'm not going to go through all the pieces here, but this gives you kind of a sense of, these are the topics that we covered during our policy workshops. And so in each of these different topics, we talked about what is the city currently doing in this area, what do the current standards say, what might be some other options, and then kind of analyzed the pros and cons and made some decisions. So, and with,
Sorry.
jeez, trigger finger over there. So, just jump ahead. From all of that,
You can tell them to go back.
I can
well,
go back.
if you really want to go through it, I was just, the whole point is, you know,
We're happy to.
we're, yeah, jump back. Just let me finish my train of thought there. Ugh. So, for example, one of the things we talked about was like the conveyance system standards. So, what pipe materials are going to be allowed, how big the pipe needs to be, how much flooding water it needs to hold. And the analysis and the policy decision there was to keep with the standard the way the city's been doing it. Things have been working well. We don't have a lot of big flooding problems. The state regulations don't make us change that. We're going to stick with what we have. On some of the other pieces, like the types of stormwater facilities that we're going to use, we needed to get in line with the new regulations, and so some changes needed to be made. All right, next slide, please. And this is a quick, this is what the new manual looks like. There's 9 chapters that cover comprehensive list of topics related to everything with grading and stormwater facility selection and design. And then we have 8 technical appendices. And the goal of the appendices is to assist developers and city staff in implementing the standards. So there's very specific guidelines for how to conduct an infiltration test so that everybody's doing it the same way, the same time, and the city staff has the same form to review to make sure that someone's doing it correctly. So that's what the proposed manual looks like.
So you mean just in Clackamas County, and the cities in Clackamas County, or you're talking about statewide?
This is just in Oregon City.
Oregon City, okay.
Yes. Next slide. So, what's changing? That's the big, this is what we really want to know. I don't know if we provided you folks with the summary. We have like a 1-page summary that covers exactly what's changing, and then there's a table that compares the old manual to the new manual. We can provide you copies of that if you haven't been given it. I don't know if it was...
I can make copies of that.
It was in the, I know City Council got it, but... So we'll get those to you guys. That's for those that having insomnia and want to really read the details. So the bottom line, the new standards meet the MPDS permit requirements. That's first and foremost our goal here. Some of the changes that will be helpful on the implementation side, the new manual has a single set of thresholds for water quality and flow control. What that means is your standard right now says that if it has a threshold of impervious surface. So if a new development comes in and is going to add X number of square feet of impervious surface, then you have to address water quality. And if it's going to meet Y number of impervious surface, then you have to address flow control. This threshold say 5,000 square feet. If you add or replace 5,000 square feet of impervious surface, you need to implement the stormwater controls in the standards. Water quality, flow control, the whole bit. No varying standards for different pieces. That should make it easier, especially on reviewers and people figuring out what they have to do. The new standards prioritize LID, so they require developers and city staff on staff project or city projects to determine whether infiltration is feasible on a site, and if infiltration is feasible, to use infiltrating facilities as the primary means of disposing of stormwater, because that, again, mimics natural conditions. That's where the water would be going today. If your site infiltrates well, the water would be soaking into the ground. We want to do that as much as possible. When we can't infiltrate stormwater into the ground, then there's a flow control standards that ask that you install a facility like a pond and design that facility so that it releases water similar to the natural runoff rates and durations. The new manual also has some detailed planting guidance that has for developers and staff or city engineering staff or whatever, there's the landscape facility planting guidance has sample planting plans as well as a list of plants that would be acceptable for the various facilities. Again, trying to make it straightforward for what we're looking for in these facilities.
Thank you.
The new manual is regionally consistent. So like I said, Clackamas County has worked to develop a very similar manual. They've had some adoption hiccups with various political back and forth over there, so they haven't officially adopted their new manual, but they're encouraging developers to use it. Wilsonville adopted very similar standards in October. And we've been hearing discussions with folks, Gresham, Clean Water Services, and others in the area about trying to move to something similar. Next slide. The other thing that the manual has with it is a BMP sizing tool. BMP is best management practice. So for sizing stormwater facilities, there's a software program that'll be available from the city's website that allows a developer or an engineer to quickly assess and determine how big of a stormwater facility they need to use for their site. It's very straightforward. It has an automatic reporting tool, so you size your facility, print your report, and then can submit that report to staff to review your development and make sure you've designed it appropriately. That should make it easier on developers as well as review staff. Next one. So we thought we'd just give you guys a case study to see what is this going to mean. So this is a development that, relatively recent development. I understand this is Cooperstown. That's,
Yeah, what is it called?
I believe that's what people keep telling me.
Have you been back there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird. Not my idea of a really good commercial development, but
So what we wanted to look at and say, this is a commercial site that was developed, so Malala and Highway 213 Plaza. It's about 2.5 acres and was developed under the current standards. And I will just say up front that we didn't do a detailed assessment of if they did it right or not, but the size of facilities that they put out there seem appropriate to me, and I have no problem with the way that this was designed. But the site is 84% impervious, and so in order to manage stormwater runoff, the site has some underground facilities that you don't see on this aerial photo. So if we look at the next, if you hit the button, so this is underneath the ground out there. There is the larger orange square. That is a series of underground tanks that are designed to hold stormwater and then release it downstream at a slow rate. And there's a smaller orange box, and that is highlighting there's another underground tank that has inside of it a series of filters that are providing water quality treatment. So the water's filtering through there and then going into the tanks. Both of those things need to be maintained. The filters need to be changed out periodically, every year to 2 to 3 years, depending on how much pollutants coming off the site. And the tanks presumably need to get in there and get cleaned. It's very hard while this design should work perfectly well, it only works if you maintain it. And it's hard for anybody to tell if it's being maintained. So you can ask them when you're out there.
Are those storm chambers?
I don't know what
They're
system
pretty
they
widely
use.
used. Yeah.
Because the plans just said, well, if you look up above, there's a schematic above there that's there. I think it's just large tanks.
Large tanks.
Next one. So if this was getting developed under the new standards, what they would likely use would be what are called stormwater planters, and I'm sure you've seen these around other areas. So these are within a landscaping area adjacent to a sidewalk or another parking space. It's a landscape feature that sits below grade and is designed to accept stormwater. They do have amended soils and a gravel bed in there that will hold more water, but this site is not going to infiltrate well, and so the planters will have a small underdrain pipe that will send that water downstream just like the tanks would. But you're going to get all the water quality treatment. There's no separate filter treatment here. You get your filtering through the plants, the soil, and the gravel that is in the facility. So we looked at how big would they need to be. So if you hit the next slide. And I just want to say, so we did not redo the site plan out here. But this is where, when we size the facilities, based on the amount of impervious area that they proposed, this is, just an idea of where these facilities could be. So you could run them along. There's existing landscape strips in most of these areas where you'd be turning them into planters, except for the larger green square rectangle at the top that says 30 by 130. That would be covering over a portion of the parking. But I think with some different site configuration, you would still be able to fit your parking in various areas. Again, we didn't do a full site layout. One of the things that we identified and recommended, if you were relaying out this site, you might look at putting this landscaped area adjacent to the frontage and providing more of your treatment at the frontage portion of the property. Right now, I believe they're getting their landscape credit on the back side of the property behind the buildings. That looks to me to be where their landscaping is not visible to anybody. Next slide. So then the question is always cost. So on this site, just looking at preliminary engineering costs, the underground filters and detention tanks versus the stormwater planters come in almost identical. That was accidental, but it was nice. I mean, that's we see things sometimes higher, sometimes lower, depending on the site. They're in the same ballpark generally. There's some advantages to these planters. One is that they can be incorporated into site design. You can use them to meet your landscaping requirements on the site, so you're getting double, you're using the same facility for two purposes on the planning standpoint. And what I really like is that, what's the maintenance going to be? Any commercial site is generally hiring a landscape contractor to come out and maintain their trees and shrubs anyway. And so the maintenance of these facilities is going to be done by those same contractors to come out and maintain the landscaping there, remove sediment if they have a big slug of pollutants that come through. So the city's also in a better position of being able to tell if the maintenance is happening or not, because it's right there, it's visible.
Has it been your experience that sort of the run-of-the-mill landscaping people that you see running around with a truck and a lawnmower, I mean, it seems to me that you would need to have a little bit more expertise to understand how to maintain and also manage a stormwater facility, because it's not a matter of cutting everything and shaping it into balls,
Right.
which is what we see a lot.
Yes. So there's been a big push because what we're seeing is a big push to provide that education and training. And actually, like PCC Rock Creek is teamed with Clean Water Services to affiliate or to develop a certification program for landscapers that could get their sort of stormwater-based maintenance certification. And they're had questions from other educational options. I don't know about Clackamas County Community College, but there's some discussion of trying to expand that program into other areas, because that has been a concern of making sure people know what they're
I think the
doing.
biggest issue with these are the accumulation of fines. Or
Yeah.
fine.
So they would accumulate fine particles, and you have to occasionally take those out of there or replace the mulch that's in there as it gets broken down, and then making sure that the plants are still alive, and sometimes replacing a dead plant here or there.
Right.
Yeah. That's, I believe, I think that's the end of the slides that we were going to cover. We talked about, I think the next one's just the timeline. And then timeline, some of these dates have shifted just a little bit, so Pete's original one is a better view. But we are planning to go to City Commission for first and second reading next month, depending on what we hear from you folks today. And next slide, one of the questions that we asked council at the work session and wanted to share with you is how, what sort of adoption period made sense for these standards. Basically, what is the effective date going to be and how much notice are developers going to need? So we had that developer and engineer workshop back in February, and city staff have been providing information about these new standards since that time, since January, to let folks know that this is coming. The recommendation that came from council work session was to have a 90-day adoption period. So after the manual is adopted, it would be effective for developments that come in for land use application effective 90 days after that date. Makes sense that if you're if you are far enough into your development process that you can get something submitted within 90 days, you can stay under the old standards because presumably you've already done some work against those old standards, current standards. If you're more than 90 days away from submitting a land use application, that should be enough time to adjust your design to meet the new code.
I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of some of these large commercial areas, in case of a fire,
Mm-hmm.
where they use some somewhat sophisticated chemicals to fight a fire, if it's a vehicle or a large store or something like that, how are those chemicals captured in the runoff from the parking area? They're just subject to the same gravitational influences that
It would be. And there is a, the acknowledgement state, the state guidelines acknowledge that firefighting chemicals are a hazard to stormwater, but they have exempted those type of discharges from the MPDS permit. That's an allowable, firefighting activities is an allowable pollutant discharge to the system. Doesn't happen very often.
But yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that often, but they are not treated, or are they?
As far as whether the stormwater planters would effectively treat that chemical, I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, you would get the capturing initially of them, but I would guess that more likely you would end up with dead plants than a lot of chemical capture.
But you even get chemicals from the vehicles parking and sitting there on a hot day.
And so those planters do a very good job of treating everyday chemicals. So we have actual data now. There's been a lot of testing and monitoring to determine what sort of pollutants are typical in stormwater runoff from commercial sites, from residential areas, and of course the commercial is higher because of the vehicles. And then we have data to show what types of facilities do the best job of removing those pollutants. And it is these vegetated facilities with a strong soil layer that do a better job of removing pollutants than underground tanks and vaults.
Mm-hmm.
At what point of the collection and discharge of these facilities do you establish the concentration of these chemicals?
So when they do the monitoring, they typically would be, they're collecting upstream and downstream. They're collecting samples at the point where the water flows into it, so over the curb or through the curb cut, and then they take another sample at the bottom of that underdrain. We have the pipe underneath all the soil where the water's leaving and moving into the downstream pipe system. And so then they're comparing the removal between those two.
Who does that?
Actually, it's been a lot of work from jurisdictions around the state. City of Portland has collected a lot of data, and I don't know if Oregon City, I don't think, has collected facility data, but there has been Portland and Gresham. We're using that data to actually model now how pollutants are being treated for individual communities. That's another requirement of the MPDS permit. So that data has been collected over, now 5-10 years. City of Portland has some of that data that's even older than that, and looking at it. And the good thing is we're seeing consistent information on stormwater runoff, and starting to see some consistency in removal efficiencies for different types of facilities. So it's still an inexact science, but we're starting to feel pretty good and pretty confident that our numbers are making sense on these facilities.
So with regards to the regulatory framework, I'm in a pre-app with a developer, and do they have the option of doing an underground system or above ground, or I didn't see anything about the favored one method over another.
So we do have the manual does have a stormwater facility hierarchy that requires developers and any applicant to first look and see if they can do infiltration and if they can do a surface facility. If your site is constraining you against doing that, then you need to show that it doesn't work. You need to have a reason to show we've done our infiltration testing and we can't infiltrate at this site. Mm-hmm. We have these other land use planning restrictions that are going to prohibit us putting in a site. And if you can go through the hierarchy and say we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that, then an underground system could be submitted as an alternative method. Throughout the manual, there is the option of a developer submitting an alternative method with city approval to do something that's slightly different than what's in the manual.
Okay, and then we had models for commercial development, which are pretty attractive, but I'm still worried about the ones that we see in the subdivisions and large expansive developments that end up looking like kind of just a large pit with
Right.
water in it, which is something
Yep.
I'm hoping we can maybe change a little bit.
So
Yeah.
these standards do change the basic design of those stormwater ponds. So the current standards have used the idea of a wet pond where you have this bottom area of water, and the point of the water was to settle out the pollutants. And these new standards now have where you would still use a detention pond, it's designed to be a dry pond. So it's designed to be a giant landscaped feature
Right.
where the water, just like the planters that we looked at, with a deep soil layer, water will soak through and then again use the under drain system to take the water out. So we are trying to avoid those mosquito pit, big open water spaces. The other thing that these standards do is allow the use of smaller, like I would say sidewalk style rain gardens that could be put throughout the development, which should, if you can use those in other places, that would shrink the size of your pond that's at the downstream end. It does add some maintenance for city staff then to be maintaining those facilities along the sidewalks, but it would reduce your overall size.
Okay. That's what I was hoping to see, is some kind of integration into, because these subdivisions, you look at them and then they have this subdivision and there's this
Extra track.
this pond with an extra tract with a pond in it. And
Yeah. Now, the way with the soils and geology that you have in Oregon City,
right.
there's not a lot of areas that infiltrate well. So you are still going to have ponds. This manual, again, goes to a dry pond, so you should be able to maintain better landscaping in them. And you should see less water and they should be shallower because we're doing, the standards have you hold water in the soil layer as opposed to all above ground. But you will still, I guarantee you're still going to have ponds. They're still going to be kind of set off from the development, but hopefully they're not going to be a big open pit anymore.
Okay.
Are those going to be a vector control problem?
The current ones sometimes are, although we don't see a ton of,
Any beavers have
we don't see
been-
hear a ton of complaints about them. The new ponds should be dry, which should help with vector control for sure.
My wife, being a public health nurse, asked me to ask that
That's
question.
standard. And well, you can tell the new ones should be better.
I'm in trouble if I don't get that in.
Well, well done.
Hey, that's
You're on
on-
video.
That's on the record.
See, you get
Are
your
there
public health
any
credit today.
other questions?
No.
Okay.
When you finally come down to it, it's all about public health. Really. It's the bottom line.
Water quality is part of public health
Well,
too.
the traffic, putting houses too close together where they catch fire,
Health,
stuff like
safety, and
that. It's all
welfare.
public
True,
safety.
that's very true.
Yeah. And that catch-all.
That's the.
So, gentlemen, how would you like to proceed?
Do we want
Do
to
we
make a
want-
motion? Is that
No, I don't know if we're ready for a motion. I see
Okay.
various people have their,
notes?
There's two sets of types of comments that I have on the things that I've been looking at, just like sort of global types of things, like the things that I've been talking about regulatory wise, and maybe some questions about 15-year stormwater design and whether or not there's been any changes to that, whether or not you guys are dealing with some of the kind of global change issues in terms of shorter duration, higher intensity types of rainstorms. If there's been any kind of discussion about that, and then there's just some little kind of textual things that I don't want to go too far down in the weeds with this, but
well, do we
I'm
want,
not sure exactly
did
how you want to do it.
Pete, did you want to say anything else? Or are you
Um,
ready for
no,
us to?
If you have any questions for staff, we'll do our best to answer those.
Do we want to do that?
I think,
Sure.
Would it be easier if we just went through this page by page, and if people have comments on them, then we can just address the comments or the concerns on that particular page
think that's
before we move on to the next one? We don't need to close the public hearing or anything at this point, do we? Okay. All right, so is anything on page 1, which starts out with chapter 1312, stormwater management?
Okay, so in item A, I've got any new any new and existing development?
Under minimize
Or-
increased
or-
stormwater runoff?
Or modifications to existing development, something like that.
And just
So
for
new development,
clarification,
yeah.
is this page 1 of the staff report?
Yeah,
This-
this is page 1 of the
Draft.
highlight.
Of the draft
Yeah,
document?
I think we're all
Of
looking.
the code, three,
Yeah, all of us probably have the track changes one, so, do you have the track
Okay.
changes one?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're
Which
all.
I appreciate.
Yeah. Yes, I did, I certainly appreciated that. That was very helpful.
So I guess my thing under item A of the purpose section was just to make sure that we're dealing with modifications to existing development as well as new development.
Well, any development means any man-made change.
Okay.
So any man-made change would be new, and then it would be subject to regulation.
Fair
That's
enough.
how I read that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think I read it kind of the way you did it. Any new developments, I'm thinking, okay, new development.
It has to be new.
It also means that these changes are not retroactive to
Mhm.
existing, so
Right.
they're not requiring someone to go out to their subdivision
Right.
right now and make a change.
Wouldn't want to do that. Yeah.
Anything
That
else
makes
on,
sense.
on page 1? Okay, let's,
I mean, it could just as easily say from any development. It could, the word new could not be there.
Yeah,
okay,
that's-
let's, does everybody
might
like
work.
that?
everybody make sure your mic is on, please.
Yep, it's on.
mine's on.
So so there's a suggestion to change
Just change it to any development.
any development and take out the new development.
Yeah. That's better.
Yep. Okay, page 2.
Last paragraph, instead of saying as amended from time to time, how about as periodically amended?
13.12.030 at the end.
Yeah, last sentence.
Mm.
I just had a question about M. It says allow issuance of engineering permit, yada yada, and then the second sentence, as a part of overall issued public infrastructure construction plans. And I wasn't really sure what that meant.
So that's like when somebody comes in and they want to build a sewer, and they have construction plans for that sewer that engineering people look at? Is that?
Yeah,
What that
that, I'm thinking that refers to the Public Works construction plans for any development that would include public infrastructure. The building permits would cover anything on private property, but
My note to myself says, is this inferring that it's by city and others who are doing some overall public infrastructure project? That was just my note. Okay. Anything else? Page 3?
Nope.
I had questions on page 3.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Up at the very top where it says applicant, it's defined as a person, party, entity, firm, legal entity,
Mm-hmm.
anybody applying for, and then there's a couple of other places as we go on, I just was pointing it out, where it only refers to a person, and so I'm wondering if, when we get there, I wanted to refer back to that. The other question I had was, it says bulk petroleum storage, so it's only talking about above ground. What about, a lot of places have tanks in the ground. What about that?
That's a good question.
Underground storage tanks are regulated separately, and so because underground storage would not interact with stormwater, they
Unless
don't end
it's
up
leaking.
being. Then it becomes a groundwater issue, and not a
okay.
stormwater surface water runoff issue.
Does anyone need an extra copy?
I'm good.
And then, Paul, you had one under,
Construction, definition, site altering activity including but not limited to grading, paving, utility construction, and building construction. I would want to say tree and vegetation removal. Would that?
Equipment, green, paving, utility. Okay.
Where?
Wouldn't that
I
be
think the question is, does tree removal on a certain type of development trigger storm compliance with the stormwater standards in that case? And I
yeah,
don't
and that
think it
not,
would,
no.
unless it's part of a development application, which we have a a separate code for tree removal.
Okay. I mean, this wasn't a draconian way of trying to
Right.
control trees or anything,
No.
but I just,
But what
But-
you're
Yeah.
talking about is when we've had issues with applicants before they file for something, come in and just completely take out everything. I mean, I don't have a problem with leaving tree removal out, but it's vegetation. I mean, part of what helps a property filter stormwater has a lot to do with all the stuff that's on it. And if they come into the city and then they scrape it, so then you just got a big pile of dirt.
They would be scraping it for a purpose.
Well, no, a lot of times they don't scrape it for a purpose. They just do it before they come in and talk to us. And then they come up here and we say, well, what happened to all the trees on your property? And they go, oh, well, we took them off before we... And then we're like...
Yeah.
My feeling about that is that many cities have a comprehensive tree removal code that regulates that through a permitting process, and they also have stormwater standards. And I think they're separate for a reason, because one is explicitly designed to comply with the MS4 stormwater discharge permit.
Right.
The other one is dealing with the trees. Yes, they are related. We know they're related. But my feeling as a planner is that if you were going to approach tree removal comprehensively, you would do it through a tree code amendment.
and then
Yeah.
that would end up being beneficial to the stormwater issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It just, it kills me that we all know this,
Yeah.
We
and the
can't do
science
anything
is
about
all
it.
there, but
Can't
for
do
some
anything
reason the
about
stormwater standards aren't really
Yeah.
talking to
I see what you're
how
saying.
much evapotranspiration trees really actually do and how much stormwater vegetation and trees actually prevent.
Have you run across that anywhere else?
I mean, that's all. That's all I would. That's the
Yeah,
only reason why I was.
Well, it raises a really important issue about erosion and undermining of roadbeds and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And like Paul says, we all know it, but try to get a handle on it so that it doesn't.
Cause problems.
But that's the thing, we know
Yeah.
it, but there's no explicit guidance that kind of
Kind of
informs
helps us
us.
with that.
Yeah.
So you
Right.
are, when adopting these, you are adopting an updated erosion and sediment control standards manual as well. And the erosion control threshold is 1,000 square feet. I apologize, I did not mention that. So the development standard for having to install a facility is a 5,000 square foot threshold. On the erosion control is down to 1,000 square feet. So that would, the new erosion control standards would apply even to a single lot development. Typically, they're going to impact 1,000 square feet. So, and the new manual is a county-wide manual, Clackamas County countywide manual, that does require folks to, at least during the construction process, address that exposed soil and also have a plan of how that soil is going to be stabilized post-construction. But no stormwater facility necessarily required unless you get to 5,000 square feet.
Can I ask a question about something that Denise, you just said about people come on here and they've already clear cut or cleaned the property off. Now, Peter, you just said the city has codes in regards to that, but what about things that are just on the urban growth boundary? They're right outside the city limits, but we know that it's sooner or later they're going to come to the city for some kind of a construction permit, but they're clear cutting something right this very day, but they haven't even started to bring it into the city yet. Nothing can address that, right? Because it's outside the city. But so when they come before the planning commission and they've done that within a certain amount of time, a year or 2 years before coming before the city, is there anything the city can do about that? I've been asked about this recently. That's
Yeah, some cities do have an annexation policy or a look-back policy.
why we don't.
We do not.
Probably should.
I thought there was a few years ago. Somebody had said we did.
It was discussed
When it
a
referred
few
to Park
years
Place.
back. We did look at, I think it might have been either West Lynn or Lake Oswego's.
I could tell you all
policy.
about Resolution 438, but I
Yeah.
don't think we have time now.
Yeah. It's kind of a political discussion to have, to be honest.
It's very hard to enforce.
Yeah.
We're just mean.
I mean, it's nice to have that piece of paper to give to people when they annex, and it does act as a deterrent. But if someone actually does it,
Well,
it's really
It's
tough.
the
to
do it now and then ask for forgiveness
get them
later,
to
which we're
Okay.
not really.
do what they're supposed
Sorry,
to do.
it was brought up by the two of them, and I wanted to get a clarification.
I think it's a good policy, really, because
Yeah.
we've had huge trouble over in
And we're having some in Park Place right now. It's been brought to our attention recently.
That's why we
Yeah.
call our buddies at the
But-
county.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Private property, nothing you can do, I guess, but
No.
we were wondering if the city had a policy.
no, and it wouldn't be related to our MS4 permit. It would be related to
He's
annexation.
just talking about it in
Yeah.
general.
In general, having to do with, yeah,
Mhm.
tree
So-
removal.
The last thing I have on page 3 is under the definition of development. Why are we referring to improved or unimproved real estate instead of property? I don't know if that, we talk about property elsewhere in the document, but we don't use real estate anywhere else in the document.
Mm.
I will say the changes to the definition of development that you're seeing here are to line up to make them identical to what's in Title 17. There was a strong feeling that when we had similar words in Development Code in Title 17, that this code should be using the same definition so we don't have confusion. So those changes there are directly making this directly match 1704.
So does this have its own set of definitions then? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're looking at, the definitions just for 1312.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be helpful to have the definition of building or structure?
I
Or would that
thought it
not-
was in there.
I don't think I saw it.
It's not
Maybe I
that word.
missed it.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if that word is used or not used. We didn't look for it.
Structure is defined to mean building or other major improvement that is built,
Yeah, I thought I
constructed, or
saw
installed. It also means man-made improvements to land that are used or expected to be used in the operation of utility.
Where does she see that?
Where is that?
I don't see,
Where are you? Under structures?
Uh-huh.
I go up to P.
Okay.
You
I
don't
go
have
up
the
to,
whole thing.
I don't have the whole thing, okay.
Yeah, I see structures on page 7.
Okay. That'll probably work.
Okay. Anything else on page 3? How about page 4? I had one, but you answered my question already, so that's good. Anything on page 5?
Bear with staff a second. We're operating with an incomplete hard copy. So,
That's what I
I have a
got.
copy, just keep going and I'll make
Okay.
it.
yeah.
All right, again, we've got that generic under maintenance, and down on owner or property owner, we have person. So, again, going back to that definition where we're not specifically calling a person an applicant, but
Individual.
a person, you say, who is a legal owner. It could be an entity, it could not be, it may not be a person.
That's right.
It could be an entity, or it could be an S corp. It could be,
Well, but the point,
yeah, I know, but I mean,
the
it's
point
just,
is that the person may not be the applicant and probably won't be the
Right.
applicant.
I know.
So,
It says, an agreement between the city and the person or persons holding the title to the property. Well, maybe a person does not hold the title. I know it sounds ridiculous, but a person may not be the person holding.
okay, we can add
Title.
we can add a definition of person.
Yeah, I mean, because I was just thinking. I said here, it could be a corporation, an LLC. There is probably a representative, but that's not who owns it. So we should just be broad, I guess.
Understood.
Anything on else? Page 6? Anything on 7? I had a question under structures where we're saying building or other major improvement. Are we
Can you tell me what number?
structures on page
Page 7.
7? It's the definition. I didn't really know what a major improvement was, or are we just saying means a building or other improvement that is built, constructed, as opposed to, and then you go in the next sentence, it's not we, but you. It says minor improvements such as fences, utility poles, flagpoles, or irrigation systems that are not customarily regulated through zoning code. I just wonder if major was needed.
Major is the opposite of minor, right? So minor is our fences, utility poles, flagpoles, irrigation systems that are not regulated through the zoning code, and a major improvement would be a shed or something that would be regulated through the building code. Is how I would interpret that.
Yeah. And I wrote in, what if somebody builds multiple, so we have a 200 square foot minimum. So if I built a shed that was 199 square feet, it wouldn't come under the 200 square foot minimum. So what if somebody built multiple? I'm just thinking of, these little mini houses they're trying to build for encampment. So what if you have like 10 of those on a piece of property? Is that still a minor improvement? To me, that starts to become a structure with a bunch of little buildings on it.
Wasn't that done in Washington County a couple of years ago?
Yes,
Just to-
yes,
Just to get around the subdivision regs?
yes.
Stormwater,
That
in
was
the
under
stormwater
Measure 49.
standards, it does require that the development for the threshold be cumulative over a 7-year period. I forgot what we went to. 5-year period. So it prevents someone from coming in and submitting for their 1,000 square feet each and every year for 5 years. Once you hit
A certain
5,000,
threshold.
they would then have to go back and
Okay.
retrofit.
So when we're on that, is there a big difference between the stormwater requirements for partitions versus subdivisions, or has there been any changes with that at all? Okay.
Page 8. Are the additional performance standards for erosion prevention and sediment control limited to privately owned parcels, or is it publicly owned parcels as well? It lists
It's
under
both.
that section A123 talks a lot about privately owned.
I'm sorry, what page are
So,
we on?
on page 8, it says additional performance standards for erosion prevention and sediment control are also established in da-da-da-da-da. And I guess, is the OCMC on there twice, I guess? I guess that's, yeah, it's in there twice. So then it's got item A, 1, 2, 3, and it talks about privately owned parcels, privately maintained.
To the point that if they're privately owned and privately maintained, then the flows aren't going into the public system?
I don't know.
So
That's why I asked the question.
So the beginning of the part that you read about erosion and sediment control, those apply to both public and private. And then down below, it says, so pursuant to each of the subsections below, we have some more specific requirements for conveyance systems, water quality, and water quantity. And so for conveyance applies to all stormwater systems constructed unless they are entirely on private property. So that's only on the conveyance
Okay.
piece. The erosion and sediment control still applies to that private piece.
Okay. And the public pieces?
And the public pieces as well, yes.
I have a question, it's for Carrie. Carrie, is the city going to be responsible for establishing controls to prevent water runoff onto another piece of property, not a public piece of property, but onto another adjoining privately owned piece of property? Because we've run into it a couple of times, and we were asked to control that and correct it, since we had the opportunity to do it. What responsibility under these regulations do we have to do it? Is it implied, or should we make it specific, or just ignore it?
We reference Oregon drainage law. So Oregon drainage law is what's the word? It's a
Common law.
common law. It's not a written law, but the common law said, basically through case decisions and stuff, says that you cannot alter the natural flow of stormwater between your property and someone else's. So you can't rechannel and point your water at someone else. And you also, if the water is going there now, you can't stop the flow. That's from like old irrigation laws and things. So as far as if someone is currently directing water to their neighbor, there's not much the city can do to require them to change that. However, if they were to make a change that impacted their neighbor, the city would be able to look and see, did they do something that's in violation of these stormwater standards that you could then regulate.
The construction that, or the ones he's talking about, were ones where people wanted to build and do developments there, and the people were already concerned that the water was draining in there. So now they're going to do a development, and that's going to mean more a runoff going to those same
And
properties.
so
right?
then these standards say that that runoff needs to mimic the current conditions.
But the current conditions are already flooding it, but now they're adding a new development above this person, so that those people below are concerned that, yes,
It's
they're
gonna
not
get more
altering
water.
it, but it's going to add to it even worse.
I think we have.
The whole point of this is containment and slow trickle in. So I mean, the bad part is we've got historic flow. We've got historic flows that are running faster than natural conditions. And so we're holding this downstream property owner to contain more water than they would naturally have had to, right? Because we didn't do as good a job with containment historically. And that's what this, I think, is about, is you take the property as you find it, and you've got to contain what is coming to you, right?
Yes, and it does require, it does require developers to look at not just what water is coming off their property today, but what would the historic conditions have been. So if you have a property that has some development on it, and you're going to tear that down and re-partition it and put a bunch of homes on there, you need to try and sort of mitigate for that alteration that's already happened.
So in other words, you don't get a grandfathered right to
Discharging
keep
at a
discharging at a
Somebody
higher
else's
rate.
property.
But you just said a minute ago, correct me if I probably misheard it, but you said it's up to that person to contain the water flowing into their property. So that's up to the person below who didn't even cause the problem to.
Well, because we can't go back and
No.
regulate the people that we didn't regulate as stringently as we should have.
But if there's a new development coming in that's going to put more impervious surfaces and more homes there with more runoff, isn't that a time when we look at something like?
Yes, but my point is we can't go back and get the upstream guys for their share. We have to treat the stormwater that is on this property based on the historic flows.
It's kind of the best we can do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
We've heard it a lot.
Yeah.
I guess what kills me is that when you go up on the site and and I'm not an engineer, but I've seen a lot of these things, and I've seen ones that work, and I've seen ones that don't work, and I've seen ones that have been installed well, and ones that have not been done so well. And then you have the engineer that says, oh, this thing is the greatest thing since mustard, and it's working great, and it will work great forever, and you know that it won't. And so me as a decision maker has a really hard time dealing with that, I guess. Yeah. But we have to listen and weigh the evidence that's been given.
I think that one of the great things about these new standards is that they're less discretionary and they're more quantifiable because we have, correct me if I'm wrong, we have more data to establish what works and what doesn't work. And if we use things like computer models that say your infiltration area has to be this big, then it has to be that big, and it has to be this depth, and it has to have this soil, and it becomes, if it is less discretionary, then it ought to work better.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
And the new manual does have provisions for looking at the downstream as well, and doing a downstream analysis. So if there's existing conditions that are poor in the downstream section of their discharge area, then there are provisions that we can work with them to provide, improvements to that downstream section of the system.
Okay, because I think sometimes we're given a lot of fuzzy math from engineering folks from previous subdivisions that have had, a certain amount of capacity, and they can build this other subdivision with no capacity, and it just doesn't look like it's going to work at all.
This does give, as Alita said, the conveyance chapter, while we maintained current standards for things like materials and pipe types, we did add the downstream conveyance, downstream analysis requirement. It requires someone to look for one quarter mile? Quarter mile downstream. There's debate whether it's going to be the number or the mileage, but the quarter mile downstream to identify whether that system downstream has capacity. Now, if it's overland flow, that's a little bit harder to quantify, but if the downstream neighbor has a pipe or a ditch running through their property and it is overflowing, then that's something that should be identified in the downstream analysis. And if not, that would be a good opportunity for that downstream neighbor to come and alert city and you guys that, hey, we have a flooding problem, this new development, where's their downstream analysis to show that they're not going to make it any worse, or they're going to remedy a problem if we determine
And they've
it's
done
big
that
enough.
frequently.
Is that still to a 15-year storm event?
The downstream analysis, I believe, looks at that. It would be either the 10 or the 25. I will look and see.
While you're looking, that kind of brings something to my mind, is that I would say over the last 5 years, we've had some fairly major rain events where, I mean, you think that somebody's pouring, seems like pouring a giant bucket full of water, and it just comes down hard and really fast, and then you notice all the storm drains in your
Southern California
block are all backed up. So
Nevada.
how do events like that, which are obviously not predictable, how do those get dealt with? Because, I mean, every time they've happened, I've seen all over town where storm drains are just, I mean, it's come down so fast, they just back right up.
So the short intensity storm events are hard to quantify. What these standards do differently is for facilities, we're using a 60-year rainfall record. We're actually requiring developers to look at 60 years of rainfall data and size the facility based on those historic records, as opposed to the previous standards and the current standards use a sort of simulated design storm. And that simulated design storm is quite good if you live in California and not so good if you live in a place like the Pacific Northwest, where we have a lot of back-to-back, where we get those big flooding events is the back-to-back storms, or you get the events where it has rain for 3 days and now our ground is super saturated and then the rain comes in. And so the older method of designing facilities assumed that you had dry conditions and this nice, lovely one-time storm event comes through, because that's easy to do. So these standards do ask people to look at that real rainfall record. That's what's built into the sizing tool, and so it better accounts for those back-to-back storms.
Where do they get
That's great.
Where do they get information like that?
So it's from Portland Airport has,
Okay.
yeah, and then we scale that rainfall data up and down to better mimic which portion of the county you're in. So Clackamas County has previously done that work for, I guess it's for all of Clackamas County to cover that a little bit better.
Well, the one we had earlier in the year, not only did it literally dump, we had hail with it.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
And I was watching, I happened to be in Safeway on McLaughlin Boulevard, and I saw, literally, it's the first time I've ever seen rivers going down McLaughlin Boulevard, and you could see some of the trash that was in the gutter, and it was just bobbing along like you had a little boat in there. I mean, it was kind of frightening
Yeah.
to see that much water that fast move down that street and see the parking lot suddenly become a lake, and just it was pretty scary.
And there's the reality is there's some things we just can't design for. You know, we could design our pipes to be big enough to handle that event, but really what we asked people to do is to make sure that they have a safe passage for that water in those events. So where did it go? Yes, it filled the parking lot. What did it look like 24 hours later? What did it look like 1 hour later, right? So we can't always design our pipe system to hold all the water because these are these big storms. So we want to make sure that we can move it safely somewhere.
All right, page 9.
All right.
Okay, moving on, page 10. Anything on page 10? I just had a question under I. What is an industrial and commercial high traffic area? I didn't know what that was.
We end up, they are defined in the manual, but I don't think they're defined in the code. Please hold. Let me find that one. So they're defined in the manual as a commercial or industrial development that has an average daily traffic count of 2,500 vehicles, and that is consistent with DEQ's definition.
Is there in the ordinance, is there somewhere there's a footnote that refers back to that manual so you know that you're supposed to go look there? I mean, obviously we didn't have it, so.
The header of that code said.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, 11. Lots of cross-outs on 11.
Yes.
12. I like the fact that there were a lot of shalls on page 12 because we've had the debate with Ed about the will and the shall, and I prefer shall as opposed to will. 13. And there was 14. I have a big question mark next to B. I think somebody else had a question mark next to B as well. 13, 12, 140B.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the foot comment was applicable.
It begs questions.
Yeah, I said, what? Was that you, Alita, that asked the question? Or who's AMM?
That's me.
That's you, yeah. I had the same question after I didn't see your footnote, and I was like, wow, what is that saying? Do we have an answer?
This, I'll just say, the background here is we did feel like the language in this section was a little fuzzy. And the manual and the policy choice that the city staff made regarding maintenance was that there would be this 2-year
Maintenance
period in which the private developer is responsible for maintaining things for the first 2 years, making sure plans are established, and then things are
Right.
transferring over. And so it was a little bit confusing why there's currently the requirement that developers would pay the city to maintain those facilities, but it's
So are we,
So I
not,
think
we'd like
that-
to take it out.
do we want?
Yeah, I think the background on this is what currently takes place is the developer is maintaining the site, and these are usually the detention ponds for a 2-year period. And then the city takes over the maintenance of that. And the city has since entered into landscape contracts with a professional landscape contractor now to do all of the maintenance for our stormwater tracks, as well as like bioswales in the public right-of-way. And we didn't have that in place for years until just recently. So now the thought is when these are turned over to us, to the city after the 2-year period with the developer, a lot of times the plants are not in the good health that you would want them in. They're not managed the way the city would like them to be managed. So the first 2 years are the critical point for everything to be established, so that the maintenance will be less and less. And now that we have these landscape contractors for all of our systems out there, we're feeling that the best solution to receiving those in good condition is to have the developer at the acceptance of facilities, of all the public facilities, to enter in an agreement for the 2 years to have our landscape contractor taking care of the facility. They're responsible for it, but we would be using the city's landscape contractor, and then the landscape contractor would be continuing after the 2 years to take care of those facilities.
But that's not what this says. So I
Got
guess I would recommend, I don't know what you guys feel about that needs to be rewritten.
Yeah, that
to
sounds
say,
good. Though.
to say what you're saying, because that's not what it says. It says they're maintaining it, and then it's conflicting. It really is.
It almost
It's-
sounds like an in lieu fee.
Yeah.
That the developer could enter into for the city to do the service that they're supposed to be doing for the warranty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It does seem to me, the way this is written, that's what Alita described. When I read this, I thought that she described as what I thought this was saying. So it identifies that responsibility shall be
Maybe it needs
the
to be
property
two
owner
paragraphs.
developer for the first 2 years. And to ensure that the landscaping is actively maintained, they are going to pay the city to do that work.
to do
Right.
the maintenance for the 2-year period.
Yep. Yep. During the 2-year
Maybe,
period.
maybe the thing is that it's a big paragraph. Maybe it could be split up so that it's because it is, to be honest with you, it's really not clear.
Or bullet
It's-
points. Some
Or
items
maybe you go with B 1, 2 something, because you're kind of reading along and it's like it's just not clear.
Stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we could work on some wordsmithing for that.
work
to
on
make
it.
sure.
Yeah, we'll work on it for this
Is-
commission
is
if that's
clear.
okay with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, I mean, you're saying the first sentence, that's perfect. And you got a period. It's your responsibility, Mr. or Ms. Property owner developer, for 2 years. So in order to, maybe something to the effect of, in order to ensure that that happens, like you say here, that they will pay for
Or
that.
what we could do is we could make it permissive. We could say the city may require payment to maintain these facilities during this 2-year period. And then the city may do it, or you're on the hook for it. Whether the city does it or not, you're still on the hook for it.
Yeah. The city, sounds like what Alita's saying is the city would prefer to have them pay, so then why don't we just say that?
Yeah.
What,
Well,
if
except
the-
for then the onus is on the city to actually go do it.
Yeah, and yeah. Well, they're hiring somebody other than our staff
Yeah.
because we know our
And
staff.
I think that is our preference, that they would pay us a fee.
But my point is that if we don't enter into the agreement with the property
Right.
owner like we're planned to,
Then we-
or a contractor doesn't do what they're supposed to do, property owner still has to fix it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it just needs to be clarified.
yeah.
And then the bottom, just to make sure, the last 2 sentences there say that the owner developer shall provide the city a separate 2-year landscaping maintenance bond. That's in addition to the contract that they sign with you,
Yeah,
correct?
again, separate that out
That would
so
be
that
that would be the piece to move.
it's really clear.
Move it up, right?
Yeah. Maybe, like I said, maybe do B, 1, 2, 3, so you've got, so each sentence is standing on its own and you can read it rather than go, oh, wait, well, now, wait a minute, am I paying here or what are we doing here?
So these fees are paid in advance?
Sounds good.
Yes, they would pay in advance.
So like, I know our developer left the state after building our homes, and so.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah,
our
it
favorite
would be
part on
required
page
in-
15. Anybody have comments on 15 besides me?
The way you say favorite, that means you have a lot.
Well, it deals with enforcement. That's one of our favorite things.
Oh.
We want people to step up and do what they're supposed to do. Okay, so I would suggest that on the second sentence under 13-12-170, it says no permit will be issued. Why don't you say no permit shall be issued for projects of any size without the yada yada?
You're reading B.
A.
Second sentence.
So it's talking about the Department of Environmental Quality, and it says no permit will be issued for projects of this size or any other size as modified by a DEQ without a copy of said DEQ permit. So I said, why don't we just say shall? No permit shall be issued. We're not going to, there's no if, ands, or about it. If they need that DEQ permit, they can't get one unless they show us their permit.
Doesn't Will take care of that?
No.
I don't understand the difference myself. But
You will do something or you shall do it.
shall to me
Well,
means you
if you
can
will
or
do
can't.
something and you don't, then you're lying.
I know.
Right.
So then on the B, it says permits may require Oregon State Division of Land. That's really a mouthful right there. And or U.S. Army Corps of Engineer. So instead of, I think you're saying permits. And then you're saying if such permits are required, no permission to construct will be granted, shall be granted until such time as a copy of the yada yada. And then my question on the last sentence in that, it says the city will bring such conditions to the attention of the appropriate DSL U.S. Army Corps of Engineers rep. My question is, will the city, if they bring it to their attention, is it also on the onus of the city to put a stop work order on it if they don't have those permits? I know it says it's a violation of our code enforcement, so forth, on the next penalty, but would we do that?
I wouldn't think we would want to commit ourselves to that here.
No, I'm asking the question. If somebody is not getting those permits that we say they are required to get from DSL or the Corps, and they're proceeding, is that an action for a stop work order?
It might be. I think it's more
I
of a
would think that
policy.
Well, I mean, it says we will bring it to their attention. Well, what is bringing it to their attention?
I think
saying,
it
hey,
gives the city a way to bring in another enforcer. If someone is not violating a city code, then I don't think city can issue a stop work order. But they may be able to pull in someone from DSL, say, by the way, we've got this actor that's not doing their job, and then Department of State Lands could come in if they have jurisdiction. So it's a way to bring in another enforcer if city code isn't covering it.
So will we or shall we?
I don't think you want to obligate yourself.
To bringing something to the attention of our buddies on
It's
the
not like a
next level?
mandatory reporter case.
Okay. And the only other shall that I saw I thought was where the second sentence, it says, no work will be authorized until a receipt of a copy of the ODF&W. Well, wait a minute, that's not even a complete sentence, is it? Oh, it's a little n, okay. Yeah. When ODF&W permits are required, no work will be authorized. No work shall be authorized.
Are you an English major?
No, I was not, but again, it's land use to me. It's the difference. There's
I'm
a
just
land use is the difference between there's a difference in land use between will and shall.
But this isn't land.
I understand that. I apply it in my personal life as well.
She shall always do this.
I might or might not do something, but if I'm required, I shall take care of it. That means I'm really going to do it. Will means I'm kind of maybe not going to do it if I don't feel like it.
But it puts the onus on the city, though.
Yes. And we hold ourselves to a higher standard because we are the city. Anything else, or are we ready for a motion to recommend approval as our suggestions?
I recommend approval of. What
Yes.
is the agenda?
I do. Oh, sorry, those are the minutes. Sorry. My agenda's on the
Okay,
back.
Thank you.
Here's the
I
agenda.
recommend approval of legislative file L1501, the adoption of the stormwater and grading design standards with the amended notes.
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
Commissioner Guile?
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Vice Chair McGriff?
Aye.
Motion passes.
I forgot I should say I shall say aye.
Will you say aye?
Honestly,
You will.
You know, it's like when you say you're going to get married, you say, I will. I don't know.
well, I think I'd rather say I will than I shall.
Death till death do you
Don't think
part.
when you're
Don't say
talking.
may in there.
Yeah, don't say may. That's grounds for, that's trouble.
Okay, what's next?
So any information or other items to communications to bring to the attention of the commission?
I will do my best. Tony's at the Budget Committee meeting tonight, so he had hoped to be here, but I think it's
Ours is much
running-
more fun.
Thank you, by the way.
So I can tell you what I've been doing today. We observed Arbor Day today at Eastham Community School with Friends of Trees. It was a lot of fun.
How dry were you?
Oh, it got a little wet, a little muddy, but it's great planting conditions.
Did that have something to do with the in-service day today?
It was a partnership with Oregon City School District, and students came from the high school and from Blue Heron Alternative Program, and Friends of Trees was the coordinating partner. We're hoping to do a larger fall planting with McLaughlin neighborhood and Barkley Hills neighborhood later this year, and then do it every year with Friends of Trees and neighborhoods. So it's kind of a springboard for that, but that'll be a separate project. So we planted 22 trees, 4 different types, lindens, ginkgos, 5 different oaks. What else? Oh,
That's a
yeah.
lot of trees.
Yeah, 22. It's good.
What was the caliper?
They were all 1.5 to 2. Yeah. So, and they're
Those actually grow
good.
there.
Yeah.
Because they.
So those are there. Let's see.
Hydrologic
What's
regime.
the sign code?
The sign code will be before the city commission on Wednesday. We're asking for the first reading, so it's not yet been approved. There were some changes made at the last city commission hearing.
What kind of changes?
Specifically at the last hearing, there were two. There was a couple work sessions with city commission as well.
Draft.
The changes that were made to the draft include extending A-frames in the right-of-way. In the previous...
Extending?
Well, so in the previous work sessions before this hearing, they had amended the language regarding A-frame signs in the right-of-way. So instead of one per frontage, previously the language said one per frontage, or if you're within the mixed-use downtown zoning designation or the Willamette Falls Downtown Design District, that you get additional A-frames in the right-of-way for every pedestrian-oriented accessible entrance that you have to the structure, up to 3 per frontage. So if you have like a downtown business with multiple entrances, you could get multiple A-frames per frontage, up to 3. So that change was made previously through the city commission work sessions, and then at the hearing, which was the last hearing on April 1st, they suggested extending that to also include the mixed-use corridor 1 zoning designation.
Okay.
So it would allow additional A-frame signage on properties essentially all the way up 7th and Malala, kind of to Warner Milne. And then there's another one as well. So the Planning Commission, as you know, had granted the ability to not require permits for residential A-frames, also A-frames in the right-of-way, because of the limited time periods that they were allowed. So the City Commission, in response to some public testimony, allowed that the new change that will be before Wednesday would be that you could place an A-frame sign in the right-of-way in commercial zoning designations or non-residential within those same hours and not get a permit. If you want the long hours, you have to get a permit. If you want short hours, it's specific days and times of the week you need to get a permit. Then you don't need a permit. So
how is that going to be monitored
Yes,
and
monitored and enforced.
It sounds like it's really complicated now.
there is a layer of complication that was added, so we could do enforcement not during those specific time places that you do not need a permit. But if we do choose to do enforcement, when you do not need a permit, you still have the requirements that apply. So you still can't have 15 signs within a frontage. You still can't have giant signs. They still have to meet all of our codes regardless if a permit is required or not.
And what about the taking them in and out?
Yep,
That's still in there?
there's still those hours that are in there.
There's a couple of businesses that I have been frequenting lately, and I very nicely suggested to them that they needed to take their sign in every night instead of leaving it out on the, corner.
Bars and taverns.
I didn't say there were bars and taverns. I'm just saying that there's some places that I've been frequenting that have them, and I just very nicely suggested it, and then mentioned that, by the way, the city's going to be adopting a new sign ordinance. So you might want to be on top of that. I didn't mention any of my affiliation, just, hey, I heard about this.
And you said they'll still have to be taken, I think it's 10 p.m., which is the latest.
Yeah. Well,
And,
this is a business that usually closes by around 5, and
She's referring to me now.
And we're plugging away on the
It's not
educational
you.
material associated with that as well.
Any good discussion on enforcement?
Lots of discussion on enforcement. We have a team. We've assembled a team for enforcement, and it's really nice to see. So we have lots of departments in there. So we've all committed a minimum number of hours. So building said that they're going to spend at least 8 hours a week on enforcement, which could include signs. Planning said we'll spend at least, I forgot what it was, 2 hours a week on just sign enforcement. Public Works said that they would spend at least 2 hours a week on just sign enforcement. So they'll be kind of like they used to back in the day. They'll be driving along the right-of-way, and if any of the Public Works people are out, they can just pull the signs in the right-of-way.
Yes.
But specifically every Friday, again, they'll have someone dedicated to spend 2 hours just doing it, which is what they used to do. Code enforcement is going to oversee all of planning, building, Public Works, and code enforcement in the sign enforcement portion. So we have this plan, we have all this dedicated staff time. It's going to be a lot of staff time at the beginning to get the people to know what our requirements are. Our goal is for compliance, not for enforcement. So we just want to tell people what they're doing so they have a chance to self-correct. We don't want to give them opportunities to do that. So if things don't work out, code enforcement is now going to be structured to oversee that this works. If it doesn't work, it's up to them to go to the city commission and say, this isn't working, we need more money, or we need something, or we need to figure out a way to fix it. It's up to them to, if for some reason some department slips on their code enforcement, to make sure that it stays a priority. So now there's one person in charge of this specific issue. To keep everybody else in line. So
Yeah, whenever I go to a restaurant and I don't get my food like when I want to get it, I don't blame the waitress or the waiter. I blame the person that staffed, that set up the staffing that evening, and they had enough people to get all the dinners out at the right time. So I really think that this is not something that refers to you guys, but more of a budgeting issue, and this is budgeting time, to allow for a line item to put some more horsepower into the enforcement aspect, because that's really where the rubber hits the road on all this stuff. I think Denise is right.
there's a lot of emails around, even from police department, code enforcement. Are we really sure that we could actually do this? We need to really be confident that this can happen. And
Well, I was trying to decide whether I was going to ask you all if my schedule clears Wednesday, I was going to try to come to the meeting and basically talk about some of the planning commission's concerns, which some of them have been addressed, but just let them know that how strongly we felt about it. And I know that went in with the material, but it's one thing about it being read and another thing about.
They knew I was there at the meeting last
Yeah.
Wednesday,
Yeah.
and they spoke about the fact that the planning commission had put a lot of work into it and a lot of effort into it.
Well, we were
That
pretty
it took
adamant
months.
about the, we need to get people to understand that this is, and I have, up and down, Malala Avenue, and I think we talked about this before, is, the MO seems to be, gee, if my one sign for my restaurant isn't working, I'm going to add 5 more. And I just, every time I pass these couple of places, I'm just like, what?
Let's make better food.
Yeah, and I noticed that, and another question, but I noticed that Pizza Hut has vacated their building, and now there's and they put out one of those flag signs, and I was like, yeah.
I've got some ghost ones coming from my store.
You get pink umbrella.
Those big flag ones.
You can't put those out.
Code is not enforced yet.
If I see them, I'm taking them. I'm
In,
telling you right now.
It was brought up by Bob from Park Place, the fact that he had heard, and he thought he had heard in a work session early on that they were going to provide $80,000 in the budget for a code enforcement person to do that. And I immediately volunteered for the position.
Okay. Yeah.
But I guess that was wrong. He heard it wrong, or it was just that.
Well, if I decide to show up, I just want to make sure you guys are okay.
No, I think that would
if
be
I
great.
say, I'm here from the planning commission and we feel very strongly about you adopting this. I'm not thrilled about the multiple A-frame signs, because they really are starting. I'm downtown a lot these days, and they really are starting to proliferate.
But it's just one per business, not one,
I know,
2, or
but
3
it's
per business.
more is not better.
entrance.
More is not better. And now they're all over the over the sidewalk, and you're walking down there, and you're kind of.
No, it's not just.
See, I still hear from customers who come by say,
I know, say they don't know where you
we
are.
can't find stores down here because when you're driving fast, because when they come off that Westland
They
Bridge,
should not be driving.
they
fast.
can't see, and they don't know where businesses are sometimes.
We're
the
just going to
signs.
put you out there with a
Dressed
sign
as
on your
Frankenstein.
person, and then you can get them to come into your shop.
And then also attached to the recommendation at the bottom, there are the letters about opportunities to encourage well-designed signs and encourage removal of legally non-conforming signs and all of that as well.
Is it just encouraging?
Yeah, it's the ways in which the city commission can choose to fund grants and that sort of thing.
Improvement, yeah.
So
did
beyond
the-
our code, if they would want to step
So
up and do additional.
we don't have an amortization period, and people aren't going to get to have it forever and ever. Amen. And then what is the recommendation for adoption?
So we would like to see the code effective on November 1st. And so that will give us between now and November 1st to tell everybody that will listen what our new code is and how to comply. And that come November 1st, we're going to start, when we adopt our new code, it will be enforced.
Why is it, so are we talking about first and second reading and then the 30-day adoption?
So first and second reading, and then not a 30-day adoption. It will be adopted on November 1st because that's going to give us the time to do a thorough public education outreach campaign. And the campaign's in the document too. So what we want is, we don't want to adopt it right now and then do all this outreach but not really enforce it. We want to do strong enforcement right when it's adopted and do the outreach ahead of time so people could ramp up and adjust as needed.
Why?
The
Yeah,
day after
it's-
October 31st.
It's a little long. I would say September 1st.
So in other news, the CIC, Citizen Involvement Council, the management of that is now in the planning division.
I saw the shakeup.
Right. And being as they're primarily established to deal with land use and notification and that sort of thing. So Laura has been working hard on that, and we have divided the neighborhood associations up between the 4 planners as well, so that we can meet with them on a biannual basis.
You guys didn't have anything to do anyway, right?
Right. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm really excited about CIC actually.
I think that's a really good part of planning.
It's
It's the crux. It's the where it happens.
It was interesting. A lot of the original documents and even moving forward talked about land use education and stuff. And so now we can really get at doing as much land use education as we can. And so we're sort of trying to work with the CIC and come up with draft code so we can codify them and get them out of these bylaws where they were just adopted by resolution and get them in our code and make them more official. And then we can look at each meeting and see what we're doing and have education part of it, have projects as a part of it. So after we adopt our code, we want to start to look at a public outreach campaign. So we want to see how we can get the general citizen knowing what's going on in Oregon City and get involved if they want to. So how can we reach more people?
You guys should rally for a neighborhood enhancement grant program.
There we go. All right, well, we'll write that down.
It's budget time.
So,
So where is the representation going?
Yeah.
what does that mean?
Well, there was at the last meeting I was at, there was a lot of debate about
The mayor appointed.
appointments and the fact that the CIC really
Instead of the
is
citizens.
very much different than other appointed bodies that we have. The Planning Commission is not the CIC. It's neighborhood based.
So we had a CIC meeting last Monday, and so what we're doing is trying to draft this code language, which would be Title 2.3 that'll go in the code. So that will be adopted by ordinance by the City Commission. So how it will be structured in the next draft that will be on the first Monday of next month, I think it's May 4th, would be that the neighborhood associations would put forth a recommendation and that the mayor would appoint, which is what it says now. But the question was, what if the mayor doesn't want to appoint that particular person? Is there some type of compromise here where whoever the mayor does appoint has to be backed by the neighborhood association? So we're not anticipating that it's very highly likely that the mayor wouldn't appoint someone, but if the mayor didn't want to appoint whoever they put forward, could they come back and then the neighborhood association would give them another name or something like that? So there's a couple of issues that haven't been perfectly worked out, and that is one of them, is the mayoral appointment to the CIC. So a little bit more to come, but the next draft will sort of emphasize the fact that it's coming from a neighborhood association, and the neighborhood association puts up who they want to be their representative.
Laura, having been chair of the CIC for 3 years, this is the first time ever I've heard, well, I was on that for 4 years, but first time I've ever heard that the mayor appointed anybody to the CIC. It was always the fact that they are represented from the neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods elect them to be that representative. But now I'm hearing a change. You say that's the way it currently was said? Because it's never been that way. The mayor's always appointed people for these kind of city
the current
commissions.
by meaning the draft code.
Oh, okay, the current draft code, okay. And I think that was the most upset with most of the representatives, that all of a sudden the mayor has complete control over who the neighborhoods could select from their neighbors. And that's what they were upset about.
So we are reaching what I think is a really good solution. So we're trying to balance everything out and get a code that is supported by the CIC before it moves forward to the City Commission. So we want to make sure and iron out as much of this as we can.
Is that coming before us since it's land use related?
No. So it's in Title II. It'll be
It's
an
under the mayor.
ordinance. So it would go before the City Commission at an ordinance.
Well,
So no.
without
Executive
fully
order.
declaring a conflict, I think that it would be a good idea for the planning commission to be briefed
Yeah. Okay.
before it goes before the city commission, if there's time.
So there probably will be time because it also has to go before basically a version of the CIC that the DLCD has anytime you make changes.
I used to be the state, you mean the State Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee?
Yeah, so,
Yes.
and I've had a lot of talks with Jennifer Donnelly, who's our contact
Yeah.
for DLCD, and she welcomes it. I mean,
Yeah.
we really want to increase public participation, both at neighborhood association meetings and in CIC and government business. We really want to get a lot of good stuff done. so.
It's healthy. It's
Yeah.
healthy.
And that's why I'm very excited. So there are a couple of things about this draft code that we're still working through, but I'm really excited because getting a public involvement plan for the city, that is huge.
Well,
Figuring out-
we've had one over the years, but we don't have one now. We had one when I was doing the comprehensive plan update. We had a citizen involvement plan, and I was also serving on the state's.
Oh, that's what created the CIC,
Yes.
or that version.
Yes,
Mhm.
and I was sitting on the State Citizen Involvement Advisory Committee at the time. So I was the rep. I actually brought it to them and, of course, recused myself.
No, that's great.
So
So just building on what we have a lot of really energetic people who are enthusiastic about doing good and helping out, and this is great. It's great.
that was fun. Cool. We got to travel all over the state.
Just a little bit. The building staff has hired 2 new inspectors and examiners, Todd Mallett and Fred Barzikoff, and they've also hired an administrative permit tech, Tracy Turner. So they're fully staffed up, I believe.
We would potentially be hiring an office specialist as well.
Oh, yeah, and
You
possibly.
guys have ramped up?
You're planning a lot of building.
You guys have a lot of building permits
Yeah, well,
going?
there's been a lot of turnover in the building department.
I know it.
It went down to 2 people.
Yeah,
So are they
they're
getting
back
their,
up to where they were?
Orientation from Christina?
They're definitely getting that. Yeah.
Good. I was very fortunate to work with somebody who
Yeah.
already knew a lot of that stuff, so we
Yeah.
didn't have to do much.
I think it's a long process going through what is a staff level review and what has to go to HRB. That's something that we still want to hammer out with those guys. They've
Still
been
new.
with us 2 weeks. And then you may or may not have heard about the Blue Heron project. I believe they've selected 3 teams to submit a design. And I can't name all the teams because they're joint right now. But
Walker Macy,
Walker Macy's one of them.
Mayor Reed,
Mayor Reed, yep.
and then they have a weird name.
Yeah.
It's like the Collective or the
Right.
Hive or I don't know. It's some weird name like that.
So it sounds like you're up to date on that. Very
I'm-
exciting.
I was asked to fill in because Alice Norris couldn't, so I'm sitting on the selection committee.
Okay, great. And the idea is that they would make the selection by June?
We have a meeting coming up on the 14th to look at questions, and then we are interviewing on the 21st and 22nd. So I will, any planning commissions around, meetings around that time, remind me, and I will give you the skinny.
And this is for the design of the River Walk.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. I will tell you that there were 14 applicants, and they went from soup to nuts. And Christina and Tony also looked at them. Kelly was there. It wasn't quite as clear cut as the master plan process, where you had 15 people who, most of us didn't know each other, some of us knew each other, but 15 people all had the same team as number 1, which I have never, ever been on a selection committee where that has happened. And then we duked it out for 2 and 3. This one was not as clear cut. It was all over the place, and Two of the teams, I will say, are local. They're teaming up with other people, but they are the lead are local, and the third one is not from here. But they weren't as thrilling, as if I may say that, as when we were reading the other ones. It was like, wow, these people like totally get it. So I am looking forward to narrowing that down to 3 and seeing what they can. I'm waiting for somebody to knock my socks off, and that has not happened yet.
Great. Anybody else have any?
I understand from Tony that we have an application coming up, I'm not sure when, from the school district for the bus barn.
Right.
I don't think it's complete yet.
Yeah, I believe that's the
Somewhere in the early stages.
And this is
yeah.
going to be a master plan?
Yeah. You should start to get busy sort of as we move on throughout the year. We're anticipating more master plans coming down the road, but the other ones haven't been submitted yet, so a little bit further out.
I know that I'm going to make a special request. I know that you require them to have a lot of stuff that's PDFable, but when we get these master plans, if you can ask them for a few extra copies, that would be really nice, because it's really hard to read a master plan online. And I tell you, the people at Kinko's now know me by name, because I'm in there all the time making copies of our
I
stuff.
see Denise regularly. She's always on the way to the print shop.
I know. I'm there. It's like, oh, have you got a meeting coming up? Oh, you must have a meeting coming up. So they know when I'm coming in.
You pay for that, Sal? Yourself?
Yes.
You're dedicated.
But when it's a master plan like that, that's a lot of dollars, and I don't feel shy about asking the applicant to submit another copy or two, so
Right.
we can be fully informed.
Yeah, I agree. Really.
She also puts money in meters for people over their time.
That's good.
Yes, it's called pay it forward. All right, being no further business, we are adjourned, gentlemen.
Good.